He says not even preachers are above the law, as Texas Attorney General Dan Morales steps up his legal battle against Robert Tilton. I'm John Criswell.
And I'm Dale Shornack, sitting in tonight for Clarice Tinsley.
For years, millions of Americans believed Robert Tilton had a direct line to God. Every day, he appeared on television with the same promise: send your prayer request and money, and he would pray over it personally. People trusted him with their savings, hopes, and desperate moments. His ministry exploded, reportedly bringing in around $80 million a year at its peak. But then investigators followed the paper trail, leading reporters to a place filled with evidence that exposed what was happening behind the scenes. The Preacher from McKinney. Robert Gibson Tilton was born on June 7, 1946, in McKinney, Texas, to Margaret and Clyde Tilton. Nothing about the early years suggested a future filled with private jets and television empires. The family lived a normal, small-town life, far from the bright lights and studio cameras that later defined everything. Tilton studied at Cook County Junior College and later at Texas Technological University, now known as Texas Tech. College life did not last long, though, because a religious conversion in 1969 changed the entire direction of that story. By 1974, Tilton had packed up a family and hit the road, preaching at small revivals across Texas and Oklahoma. There were no cameras yet, no cheering crowds of thousands, just folding chairs, borrowed tents, and a young preacher trying to build something out of nothing. That grind on the road ended up shaping the exact style that later made Tilton famous: loud, urgent, and always promising that a miracle was one prayer away. Nobody on those dusty back roads could have guessed what was coming. McKinney itself was a quiet farming town north of Dallas, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else, and where a preacher's son growing up to command a television empire would have sounded like a wild joke. That contrast between a plain small-town childhood and the outrageous fame that followed later became part of the whole story. In March of 1976, Tilton held the very first service of Word of Faith Family Church inside a small building in Farmers Branch, Texas, a quiet suburb of Dallas. The crowd was tiny. Nobody in that room could have guessed what was coming next. By 1981, a satellite network carried the sermons far beyond Farmers Branch, and the congregation kept climbing. Membership passed 8,000 by 1988, and church property in the area was eventually valued at more than $40 million, turning a small storefront ministry into one of the fastest-growing churches in the entire country. Around this same time, Success and Life hit the airwaves, an infomercial-style program built for one purpose only: keeping the phones ringing and the mailbox full. It did not look like ordinary church television. It looked and felt like a product being sold at 3 in the morning, because in many ways, that is exactly what it was. The theology behind it all had a simple name: seed faith. The idea was that sending money to the ministry was like planting a seed, and God would grow that seed into something far bigger for the person who planted it. Viewers were often pushed to promise specific amounts, sometimes $1,000, even if they did not actually have that kind of money sitting around. The pressure to keep a promise made to God, rather than a business, made people dig far deeper than they normally would. It sounded simple, it sounded hopeful, and it worked extremely well. Think of it in the simplest possible terms. A farmer plants one seed, hoping for a whole field of crops later. That was the promise, except the seed was cash, and the harvest was supposed to arrive as a miracle from above. Preached with enough energy and repetition, the idea became almost impossible for anxious viewers to resist. The formula worked almost too well. Within a few short years, Tilton went from a regional preacher nobody outside Texas had heard of to a household name blasted across nearly every cable box in America. Success like that does not stay quiet for long, and neither did what came next. The machine behind the miracle. By 1991, Success and Life aired in all 235 American television markets, often multiple times a day. Reporters at the time called it the fastest-growing television ministry in the entire country, and the numbers backed that up completely. Behind the scenes, the operation looked less like a small church and more like a factory. More than 800 staff members worked around the clock, many of them doing nothing but answering phones, logging names, and processing roughly 10,000 letters every single business day. The ministry pulled in somewhere between $65 and $100 million a year, entirely tax-free, and reports at the time suggested Tilton and his wife, Mart, personally earned well over $1 million a year from that river of donations. Letters going out to viewers were often paired with small trinkets meant to feel powerful and personal. Tiny coins, patches of cloth, cardboard angels, small rocks, vials of sand, tubes of oil, even bottled water said to come from the River Jordan. Donors were told to send these items back for a personal blessing before mailing in even more money. The lifestyle that money bought was hard to miss. Tailored Italian suits worth thousands of dollars, luxury cars parked outside multi-million-dollar homes near San Diego and Dallas, plus a waterfront vacation property in Fort Lauderdale. For a preacher who grew up in a small Texas town, this was an almost unbelievable transformation. Even the church structure itself changed to keep outsiders from looking too closely. In 1992, the nonprofit corporation running the ministry was quietly dissolved and rebuilt as an unincorporated religious association, a move that made it far harder for state regulators to demand a membership list or detailed financial records. Viewers sent letters describing sickness, debt, and desperation, trusting that Tilton would personally pray over every single page. That promise, more than anything else, is what built the entire empire. It is also the exact promise that would soon come crashing down in the most public way possible. In the late 1980s, a Dallas activist named Ole Anthony began noticing something strange. Desperate people kept telling him they had given their last dollars to televangelists, especially Tilton, and never got so much as a phone call back in return. Anthony and his organization, the Trinity Foundation, teamed up with ABC News producers, working on an investigation into 3 televangelists, including Tilton. Between August and October of 1991, the team made 14 separate trips through dumpsters outside a Tulsa bank and mail processing company connected to the ministry. What they pulled out of the trash was staggering. Thousands of unopened prayer requests, bank statements, computer records showing exactly how personalized letters were mass-produced to look handwritten. Checks, money orders, cash, food stamps, and even wedding rings that had been removed and never returned to their owners. Anthony later claimed that most prayer requests never reached Tilton at all. Instead, the letters were routed from a bank to a mail processing facility, and finally to a recycling center, where the paper itself was pulped down and turned into ordinary toilet paper, all without the promised prayer ever actually happening. On November 21, 1991, ABC Primetime Live aired the footage to millions of viewers, hosted by Diane Sawyer. The broadcast also questioned donations tied to a mission trip through India, suggesting that money collected in the name of some of the poorest communities on Earth mostly funded the ministry itself, rather than the people it claimed to help. Viewers who had trusted the ministry for years watched all of this unfold live in real time on national television. A former maid told producers that letters piled up inside a garage until Tilton ordered them thrown out. A former secretary said Tilton borrowed lines straight from get-rich-quick books and rarely visited the sick or the struggling in person, despite claiming otherwise on television. Tilton denied everything, insisting the documents had been stolen from the ministry and staged for the cameras. In one especially strange defense, Tilton claimed to have personally handled so many prayer requests that chemicals from the paper had entered the bloodstream, supposedly causing 2 small strokes. The explanation did not stop what came next. The fall of Robert Tilton. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Stations across the country began pulling Success in Life off the air one by one. Within months, 4 separate federal agencies and 2 state agencies had opened active investigations into the ministry's finances and mailing practices. By mid-1992, the The ministry was already facing at least 9 civil lawsuits, with claims adding up to roughly $500 million. One of the saddest cases involved a widow whose husband had kept receiving personalized healing letters for 5 months after he had already passed away, each one claiming a specific message from God about his recovery. He had sent a $100 vow of faith, hoping for a miracle. His widow later sought $40 million in damages. Church membership dropped by at least 1,000 people within months of the broadcast, and ministry income fell by roughly a third almost immediately. By April of 1993, television viewership had collapsed by 84% overall. Just 5 months later, in September of 1993, the show went dark completely, ending what had once been the fastest-growing ministry in America in less than 2 years. One lawsuit from a Florida couple actually went all the way to trial, and in April of 1994, a jury awarded them $1.5 million. During that trial, defense lawyers were caught submitting fake signed release documents that turned out to belong to entirely different people, leading a judge to sanction the attorney personally. It looked like a final, crushing blow, except it was not permanent. 2 years later, a federal appeals court overturned the entire verdict, ruling there was no real evidence of fraud in that specific case, and the judgment was reversed in favor of Tilton. Tilton even tried suing ABC and Diane Sawyer for libel, hoping to clear the name attached to the ministry. That lawsuit failed too. As a public figure, the burden of proof was far too high to clear, and the case never made it very far past the courthouse doors. The legal wins did not matter much to public opinion. The damage to the reputation had already been done, broadcast into millions of living rooms, and replayed on television specials for years afterward. While the ministry was collapsing in public, personal life was falling apart just as fast. The first marriage, to Martha Phillips, ended in 1993 after 25 years together and 4 children, Amy, John, Mark, and Matt. A second marriage followed almost immediately, to Lee Valentine, in 1994. It lasted barely 3 years. During the divorce proceedings, Valentine testified under oath about a disguise kit containing fake mustaches and a $1,200 custom wig, describing outings where disguises were worn roughly half the time just to avoid being recognized in public. Valentine also testified about violent outbursts during the marriage, describing being thrown downstairs, slammed into walls, and struck with thrown telephones. Those specific claims were made in sworn courtroom testimony, but were never criminally prosecuted or proven in a criminal court. By 1997, the second marriage was over, and so was the version of the ministry built in Texas. A third marriage, to Maria Rodriguez, began in 2002, and it has lasted far longer than either of the first two combined. First wife Martha Phillips, often known as Mart, eventually wrote her own account of those years, including a memoir published in 2000, describing what it felt like to watch the ABC broadcast unravel a life she had helped build from the very beginning. The public scandal was one story, playing out on national television for everyone to see. The private one, told mostly through court transcripts and sworn testimony, was an entirely different kind of unraveling, and it stayed mostly out of the headlines. The scandal that refused to die. Long before social media existed, a strange piece of internet history was already forming around Tilton, and almost nobody connected the dots for years afterward. Clips from Success and Life, full of wild facial expressions and dramatic shouting, were quietly circulated and edited with exaggerated sound effects layered on top for comedic effect. The person behind those early edits was a young animator working out of a house near Dallas, someone who would later create Beavis and Butt-Head and King of the Hill. That animator, Mike Judge, later described the Tilton clips as some of the earliest viral content ever passed around on tape, long before anyone used the word viral to describe anything online. It was internet culture forming years before most households even owned a computer. Decades later, one version of those edited clips had racked up more than 2 million views on video sharing sites. Discussed openly by television writers and producers as an early example of internet culture forming before the internet was even the main way people shared video with each other. A preacher who once demanded absolute reverence from a national television audience had become, without ever agreeing to it, one of the first unintentional comedy stars of the digital age, remembered by an entire generation for reasons that had nothing to do with faith at all. The ministry never fully disappeared. By 1997, Success N Life was already back on the air through BET and the Word Network, broadcasting from a brand new base in Miami, Florida. A $5 million oceanfront mansion followed in 2003, along with a return to the same donation-driven formula that built everything in the first place. A comeback nobody outside the mailing list expected was already well underway. Life in Miami came with its own strange moment of danger. A masked intruder broke into the oceanfront mansion while twin daughters, Elijah and Rebecca, were home with a nanny. Nothing was stolen and nobody was hurt, and police in Miami called it a botched robbery, though the case was never fully solved. A later move to California brought a different kind of trouble, this time from the tax office. The Internal Revenue Service issued a summons over roughly $300,000 in unpaid payroll taxes tied to the church bank account. The debt was eventually paid off, and the matter was quietly settled outside of court. Local reporters who tracked the move noted something telling. A ministry that once bought more than 5,000 hours of airtime every month across the entire country had been reduced to a modest hotel meeting room in Culver City, a huge fall from the peak of 1991, even while the fundraising letters kept going out on schedule. In 2015, comedian John Oliver put the entire fundraising formula to the test on national television. For 7 months, a production team quietly sent donations to the ministry under a fake identity, starting with a single dollar bill mailed back with instructions to return it along with a tithe or offering. What came back was strange, even by televangelist standards. Small packets of colored oil meant to be poured over letters, pieces of fabric shaped like mountains, an outline traced from a foot. Eventually, a check arrived in an envelope promising a financial harvest, and it turned out to be the exact same check the show had mailed in earlier, now returned with a request for even more money. The whole exchange played out on camera for a national audience to see for themselves. The segment aired to millions of viewers, proving that more than 20 years after the original scandal, the exact same fundraising tactics were still running, just with a new mailing address and a new decade of viewers who had never heard the original story. The man who exposed Tilton Ole Anthony. The man whose dumpster investigation started the entire collapse back in 1991 spent the next 3 decades continuing to investigate televangelists across the country, becoming something of a folk hero to critics of the prosperity gospel movement. Diagnosed with cancer in 2017, Anthony passed away on April 16, 2021, at the age of 82. Tributes described someone who had spent a lifetime chasing accountability from religious broadcasters who rarely ever faced any real consequences at all. Tilton did not disappear the way many people assumed. Public records show a continued role as senior pastor and chairman of Word of Faith World Outreach Center Church, with locations still listed in both Las Vegas and Miami decades after the original scandal first broke. As recently as 2023, appearances at ministry conferences continued, with talks focused on how the original television empire was built decades earlier. A brief run through supplement sales even added a company called Stella Vita International to the resume back in 2006, promoting nutritional products as another kind of pathway to prosperity. The man who exposed the scheme is gone. The scheme itself, in one shape or another, is still quietly running. Mailing lists still active. Donation pages still online. That contrast alone says more about the entire story than any single scandal ever could on its own. A personal website and several active social media pages still carry the same message that filled mailboxes back in the 1980s, just wearing a modern coat of paint. Decades of scandal, lawsuits, and internet infamy never quite managed to shut the whole operation down for good. But what do you think? Was Robert Tilton simply a product of the televangelism era, or did his story reveal something much bigger about faith, money, and television? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because there are plenty more unbelievable stories hiding behind the people you thought you knew.